Our path is anything that reduces our sense of self-importance. Anything that reduces our self-importance tends to increase our sense of our real self. Good morning, everyone. So today's topic is, there are many ways to get to God. Many are the path, truth, bliss, God, samadhi, liberation, moksha, whatever you want to call it. I'll just call it finding God. There are many ways to do that. And as soon as you admit such a possibility, it immediately leads to two implications and one question, and they're all connected. So let me double click on that for you, unpack it a little bit. So the very first implication, as soon as there is more than one way to find God, then it is one of tolerance. The implication is, well, my way may not look the same as your way, and it might not look the same as someone else's way, but as Jesus said, we are all, he that's not against us is for us, that we are all seeking the same thing, though outwardly they might seem different. What they lead to is the same. And in fact, as we go deeper, all those outward differences begin to resolve themselves into something that's very similar to each other, and therefore respect everybody's path. There's a story that Ramakrishna used to say, and it's this man walking in the woods. I'll talk a lot about woods today and forests, because they have a lot to teach us. He was walking in the woods, and on the tree he saw this creature, and he came back into his village and he said, hey, did you see that? He asked his friend, did you see that animal? It's green in color. And the man said, I went to the same tree, I saw the animal, it was red in color. And another person that was walking by, he said, both of you are wrong, it was actually yellow in color. And they went around in the village and asked, and everybody, no, it'd be gray in color, blue color. So they thought, let's resolve this ASAP, because it was getting acrimonious in the village. So they went into the forest and they went to the tree, and they found a man sitting underneath the tree. And they said, hey, have you seen the animal that's on top of the tree? And he said, yeah, I've seen it. I spend 24 hours a day here beneath this tree. And yes, it is sometimes red, it's sometimes green, it's sometimes blue, gray, yellow. And sometimes it's no color at all, because it's a chameleon, and that's its nature. And that's the nature of multiple spiritual paths, that God expresses himself in multiple forms, but underneath it all, there is unity, there is similarity. But in order to know that, you have to go deep into one path and stay with it, just like the man beneath the tree was there 24 hours a day. He wasn't a visitor that came and looked at it at 10 a.m. it was green, and at 11 it was blue, and so on. If you sit there all the time, then you'll know what the nature is. So remember, I said there are two implications and one question. The first implication was one, it's a collective sense that there is tolerance, or even, well, it's more than tolerance. You don't tolerate somebody's path, you accept it, that it is right for them. The second implication is more individual. If there are multiple paths to God, multiple ways to find God, then what is my way? How do I find it? And can I switch paths? There are multiple ways to fill my stomach. I can eat Mexican food, Chinese food, Indian food. And you can say, well, there are all these multiple ways, but they all have the same goal. They fill my stomach. And similarly, there are multiple ways to finding God. So let me today, well, Mercury is in retrograde. I feel like some Zen today, and it isn't, but suppose it was. You say, I feel like some Zen today, and then tomorrow, well, I feel particularly meditative. I'll do some Kriya Yoga, and then the next day I'll do something else. If there are multiple ways, is this a good thing to do? And you might say, well, why not? Maybe I've spent all this time tolerating, accepting knowing about someone else's path, it seems pretty attractive to me. So why don't I do that? Why don't I give it a go? I feel drawn towards that one, this one. And is it a good thing to do? It's a kind of a tricky question. So to get a sense of what the answer might be, I remember I said there are two implications, one collective and one personal. We just went through that. The third one is there is a question that we need to ask in this context, which is, why are there multiple paths to God in the first place? If you want to be a doctor, there's really only one way, right? You can't sit on the couch and visualize yourself as a doctor and cutting cadavers. That's not going to work. You got to go to medical school. You have to learn anatomy, physiology, and you got to learn dissection, surgery, do your residency and so on. Then you're a doctor. There might be individual variations, but by and large, that's how everybody becomes a doctor. If you want to climb Mount Everest, there is exactly one accepted way of doing it. You increase your cardiovascular endurance. You learn about pitons and rappelling and bungee cords and glacier walks and so on, and you strengthen your quadriceps and upper body, and then eventually you'll climb Everest. There's really no other way to do it. So whenever we want to accomplish something, whenever we want to get something, there is generally one way with individual variations, but they are only variations. By and large, it's the same. But what if your accomplishment is the ultimate? I want to find God. Well, here is where the problem begins. Because as yogis inform us, with a smile, they say, well, you are God already. There is nothing to find. There is nothing to accomplish. The bliss and the joy that you seek, that is you already. The freedom that you seek, well, guess what? Your soul is already free. There is nothing to accomplish or find. There is no deficiency that you need to replace with something else. So spiritual path is not one of acquisition or accomplishment, where generally there is one accepted way of doing it, but it is one of purification and revelation. So this is where, you see, we all seek the same joy and the same freedom, but the gunk and the dirt that covers it for me is not the same as the gunk and the dirt that covers it for you. So the way we clean, the way we purify is different for each of us. And that's why there are multiple paths to God. And this gets back to answering the original question. So what's my path? Can I coexist with different things and try one or the other? Before I come to that, I wanted to share with you an experience that I had about 18 years ago. I was always very motivated by understanding the teachings, spending time with them, reading a book. After I came on the path, and what we mean when we say it here is that we follow the teachings of Paramhansa Yogananda, and came on the path means I accepted him as my guru and became his disciple and began to read Swami Kriyananda's works, his direct disciple and the founder of Ananda. And I got a lot of joy out of reading what Swami had to write on these, and it answered all the questions that I didn't even know I had. Then I learned the technique, and it was very profound for me to relate what I understood and what I felt in the technique. It really inspires me. That's a low-hanging fruit. It's not a problem for me at all. It's very, very natural to me. And I had some good, deep experiences. And then one day, I was at the village, and then the Ananda village, it's outside of Nevada City. It's a big ashram there. And there was what they called as a chantathon, think marathon, except it's long chanting. And this entire chanting thing, I was always a little suspicious of the whole activity right from the beginning. It didn't make much sense to me from where I was. Then I wasn't too happy at the prospect of having to chant for the next 3 hours or so. It was a little bit open-ended. So I went into the whole thing I didn't expect great outcomes from it. And you're chanting with everybody, you just can't sit there with your eyes closed and practice some technique or something. It doesn't. So I kind of chanted, And then after about 2 hours of that, there's one chant which was chanted for you as morning if you came here early enough. It is called, "So do thou, my Lord, thou and I are never apart, wave of the sea, dissolve in the sea, I am the bubble, make me the sea." I was kind of disdainfully chanting, and as I started chanting it, I had tears in my eyes, and I was watching myself weeping, thinking, what's going on? This just doesn't make sense. But without me noticing, my heart had opened. It kind of really came in from the left field. And the meditation I had after that was so much more profound than doing all the things that I was good at, all the things that I liked, and all the things that gave me joy. This thing that just didn't feel like it was natural to me was so profound. And over the next 18 years, I've really tried to internalize that my lesson, at least for the foreseeable future, is to work with things that open my heart. The other things, they are natural to me. They have less to teach me. Whereas this has more to teach me, but it's very unfamiliar. It doesn't feel like that's me at all. I feel like I'm not in the flow, but yet that's the one that feels like it has the power to take me where I need to go. Now, for someone else, that's probably not what they need to work on. Some people, they already have their heart very open, too open, lots of feelings going on, and maybe they need to serve. Who knows? And it's different for each one of us. But then once we find what that is, it's better to stick to it, simply because it is an act of purification. It's not an act of acquisition. It will do the right thing, but it feels like it may not be the right thing for us to do. They kind of coexist, this sense of power and familiarity, but also, oh, this is so weird. I just don't know where to go with this, that kind of feeling. So how do you know what your path is? If there are all of these multiple paths to God, which one do you choose? And the first one is what I just said, that it'll give results. It'll make you more still. It'll make you calmer. It'll take you someplace that you haven't been, that is so uplifting that for a moment you know that it is way bigger than who you are. That the sense of self-importance reduces, all of those things. So that's your first clue, that you're in the presence of your path. And it's a big deal when you find something like that. The second one is that it feels right. It's kind of related to what I just said. It might feel strange, it might feel unusual, but it feels right. And again, coming back to Swami Kriyananda's writings, when I encountered the book Art and Science of Raja Yoga, this was about 20 years ago now, it's an interesting experience reading it. I grew up with yogic teachings all my life. Well, maybe I didn't when I was 4 or 5, but to the extent that I can remember, I've always read about these things. And this book answered all my questions in such a satisfactory way that it's hard to explain that feeling of familiarity, that feeling of rightness that I had with it. And perhaps you might feel right about some other aspect, whatever that might be. When you feel it, it's a big deal. That hold on to it, because it will not always feel that way once we begin to work with the act of purification. The outward draw is so powerful that in a place of higher energy, in a place of higher attunement, we feel that we are close to God, and then it just goes away like that. There is this one odd little story in the Mahabharata, which remember my disclaimer, it's an odd little story, so keep that in mind. how strong is this outward draw? Why is it that when you find your spiritual path, it's hard to stick to it, that I feel like, let me try something else? Because the outward draw is very strong. There was very long time ago a very great war. It was fought among cousins, and those cousins represented good and evil. And on the good side were the Pandavas, and on the evil side were the Kauravas. And I want to tell you what happens after the battle. So this is great big apocalyptic cataclysmic battle, and then every one of the bad guys died. And there were a legion of them. They were all died, and good for the world, good for the universe. They all died. Most of those bad guys happened to be the sons of one man. His name was Dhritarashtra. He was the blind king of that entire realm over which the battle was fought. So at the end of the war, here is the blind king sitting, I have lost all my sons, and he is unconsolable in his grief. So his stepbrother, a man named Vidura, he says, my dear brother, I know what you're going through, but don't you know this is the nature of life? It's always pain and suffering. Eventually it will come to that, unless you follow your dharma, unless you follow your spiritual duty that will take you out of this pain and suffering. This is how it's going to be. And Vidura says, let me tell you a little story. Maybe this will shed some light on it. And here's the story Vidura says. He says, there was once a man. He always used to take a walk next to a forest. Okay, remember I told you forests are big in today's talk. So one day, for whatever reason, he decided, let me walk into the forest. It seems like such an attractive place. So he started walking into the forest. And then pretty soon, wild animals began to chase him. There were a lot of them, jackals, wolves, tigers, snakes, all kinds of animals, they began to chase him. And then he ran from the wild animals, goes deeper into the forest. And then as he goes deep, in front of him, he sees this scary big witch. She's standing there with her arms spread out. She's so scary that he's going this way. He makes a left turn perpendicular to animals behind him, the witch in front of him. He runs, and in his haste and fear, he falls into a big pit. And as he's falling upside down into the pit, there is a big vine that's hanging into the pit. One of his legs get entangled in the vine, and then, like bungee jumping, he comes there, twang, going up and down near the bottom of the pit. And he sees down, and there's a big snake at the bottom of the pit. And he is there. Just imagine. I told you it's an odd story. Just imagine his state. And then there are some bees that come and begin to sting his face. And then some people come and see this whole thing, and they find that he's smiling, this man. And they have no idea. They gather a conclave of scholars to see, why is this man smiling? And then they discuss this and debate this, and then they see there's a beehive from where the bees are coming, and then there's honey dripping from the beehive into his mouth. And the man is waiting. The bee stinging, snake is down here, wine is being caught, the witch over there, and animals, jackals kind of craning there next to eat him up. Oh, I forgot one more thing. There are two mice, a black mouse and a white mouse, which are up this vine. They are beginning to chew the vine, so minute by minute. And the man smiling, and then Vidura stops the story at this stage and goes to the blind king. Says, "Oh king, do you get it?" King says, "What? I don't know what you just said. I'm really, I need some help here. I'm very, very, I'm grief-stricken, and you just told me it's really not a very good story." And so Vidura says, "No, king, just think about this. The forest represents the forest of desires that draws us in. We have no reason to go there, but we go there. And as soon as we enter, we are being chased by wild animals, which represent all the diseases that dog the physical body. They chase us. And then as we run away from them, we try to overcome them. We do our cardiovascular exercise, eat right, vitamin D, supplements, we do all of that. Diseases are chasing. And then pretty soon, what happens? A few decades pass, And this great big witch standing there, that is old age. She's there, big and scary. She's standing, and you make a left turn, you go, you fall into the pit. You're hanging by the thread of time with the big snake standing there, that is death, waiting to get you. And the mice, the black mouse and the white mouse, day and night, passing of time, chewing on this vine. That is the certainty. And Vidura says to his brother, unless you follow your dharma, your spiritual duty. The man was smiling, he says, O king, because despite all of this, despite knowing that he is about to die, and even if somehow he extends death, the disease and old age are waiting for him, time is being chewed up by the mice of day and night, despite that, he opens his tongue wide to catch a piece of honey here and there. That is how strong the temptation of the world is. The bee sting of desire is generating that honey, and he opens his wide like a beggar trying to catch that honey. Despite all these obvious things, that he is in bondage, and he says, O king, the grief that you feel, that's all it is. Follow your spiritual duty. Remember the words of Krishna, he says, Shreyan swadharmo vigunaha paradharmat svanishtutat swadharme nidhanam shreha paradharmo bhayavaha. And what that means is, it is so, we each have a certain way of getting out of this pit of material bondage. We each have a certain way, and unless we stick to that, we will go deeper, we'll go fall into the pit, be embraced by death, and come back all over again, run through the forest, do the whole thing again and again. And he says, even though you're good at something else, even though something else seems to be the greater thing to do right at this moment, it doesn't matter. It's much better to stick to the path that is yours, because eventually, very, very quickly, it'll take you out of bondage. The consciousness that got us into this is not the one that's going to get us out of it. So there are uplifting things on the spiritual path, but there comes a time and you say, oh, this is way too hard. Let me quickly jump over on this side because that feels a little more palatable at this point. And Krishna says, Shreyan swadharmo vigunaha paradharmat svanishtutat. Even though you're better at doing something else, and this may not feel right for you, better to stick with this, because otherwise what's waiting is that upside down hanging on the pit. And eventually that'll be the final destiny if we didn't do that. And so, which brings me to this final little thing that, can I really have, say, 2, 3, 4 spiritual paths under my tool belt and kind of pull one out when I need one or the other? Well, you could try, but even Ramakrishna, it was his life's mission as an avatar to show the validity of all spiritual paths. He too said, now stick to one. Don't go around trying, because I want to read for you something that Swami Kriyananda writes about this. Yogananda used to say that loyalty is the first law of God. And he didn't mean loyalty in a narrow sectarian sense that, oh, you pick this and then you go around saying, mine is better than yours and you have no idea what you're missing. How could you possibly do that? We already dispensed with that. He that's not against us is for us. But it's loyalty more in the sense that real progress is possible only when we calmly accept our path and not be swayed by obstacles or ambitions or attractions along the way. So Swami Kriyananda writes why loyalty is important. He says, loyalty to our path nips in the bud the temptation to seek easier, more pleasurable pathways to God, maybe a more sympathetic teacher, or practices that make fewer demands on the ego. See, that's where it all comes down to. That's why after the initial honeymoon period, there is a sense of tapasya, a sense of friction as you begin to go deep into your spiritual path. But it's only when we make bigger demands, create friction with the ego, that real spiritual progress is possible. It's a little bit like fasting. You know, the first few hours after you miss your scheduled meal, the mind kind of revolves around it and might create phenomena like dizziness and perhaps a sense of deficiency in your joints and all those kinds of things. And you just have to stick with it. It doesn't take too long, but if you stick with it, something significantly greater awaits you just 20 minutes later or a half hour later. It's not that far away, and the loyalty to the spiritual path has a feel of something like that. You just got to go through that and then expand into something bigger. So there are many paths to truth for when looked at it in a collective sense. But for us, meaning individually, each one of us, no matter who you are, there is only one. Finding it is perhaps the biggest gift that one can have in this lifetime, perhaps a result of many, many lifetimes of good deeds. But once we find it, we have to stick to it, and the only yardstick here, again, Swami Kriyananda's words, is, he says this in his commentary on the Bhagavad Gita. He says that our path is anything that reduces our sense of self-importance. Anything that reduces our self-importance tends to increase our sense of our real self. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.